My brother raised his champagne flute and smiled at 400 guests in crystal-studded silence. "To my sister," he said, voice smooth as silk on steel, "the delusional housewife who thinks folding laundry is a career." The ballroom erupted in polite laughter. I stood at table 12 in my navy dress, holding my own glass, feeling the heat climb my neck. He winked at me across the room like it was all in good fun. 24 hours later, I walked into his boardroom wearing that same navy dress, set my briefcase on the table, and said, "James, you're fired." The chandelier above the head table cast prisms across white linen and gold-rimmed plates. James looked perfect in his charcoal tuxedo, his bride Eleanor radiant in lace and pearls. I'd flown in from Boston 2 days early to help with seating charts and last-minute vendor calls. My husband David stayed home with our daughter Lily because someone had to manage her gymnastics meet. I didn't mind. James was my only sibling, and despite everything, I wanted his day to be flawless. The reception hall smelled like roses and expensive cologne. I sat with Aunt Margaret and a few distant cousins, people who smiled politely and asked how the little one was doing. I answered with the practiced ease of someone who'd fielded that question 1,000 times. Lily was 7, bright and fierce, and yes, she kept me busy. I didn't mention the spreadsheets I built at midnight or the consulting projects I completed between school pickups. People saw what they wanted to see. James stood when the band paused between songs. The MC handed him a microphone. He'd always been good at this. The charm, the timing, the way he could hold a room without trying. Our parents had passed when we were young, a car accident on a winter highway, and James had stepped into a kind of surrogate authority. He was 8 years older, already in college when I was still in middle school. He'd looked after me in his way, which mostly meant paying my tuition and reminding me I owed him for it. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he began, voice carrying over the low murmur of conversation. "Eleanor and I are so grateful." He gestured to his bride, who beamed at him. The room applauded. I clapped too, genuinely happy for him. Then his gaze drifted toward my table. "I also want to recognize my sister, Claire. She's here tonight, which is a miracle because she's usually too busy with laundry lists and grocery plates." Laughter rippled through the crowd. I smiled, uncertain if it was a joke or a jab. James kept going. "Claire gave up her career years ago to be a stay-at-home mom. She's convinced she's doing something important, folding tiny socks and making snack plates. We call her the Delusional Housewife." More laughter, louder this time. Aunt Margaret touched my arm, her expression somewhere between sympathy and embarrassment. James raised his glass. "To Claire, who proves you don't need ambition to be happy. Cheers." The room echoed the toast. I lifted my glass and drank, the champagne tasting like acid on my tongue. David would have stood up and said something. David would have walked out. But David wasn't here, and I was alone at a table full of strangers swallowing humiliation in a room full of people who thought my brother was hilarious. I stayed through dinner. I stayed through the cake cutting and the first dance. I stayed because leaving would have given James exactly what he wanted, a reaction, a scene, proof that I was as fragile as he believed. When the band played its final set, I found Eleanor near the gift table. She hugged me, smelling like champagne and gardenias. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. I told her I was happy for them both, and I meant it. Eleanor wasn't the problem. James found me in the lobby as I waited for my rideshare. He'd loosened his tie, and his face was flushed with wine and victory. "You're not mad, are you?" he asked, leaning against a marble column. "It was just a joke, Claire. Everyone thought it was funny." I looked at him for a long moment. It was a great toast, really memorable. He grinned, satisfied, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Good. I knew you'd get it. You've always been a good sport." He walked back into the ballroom, leaving me standing there with my coat draped over one arm and my phone buzzing with the driver's arrival. I didn't cry on the ride back to the hotel. I didn't call David, though I wanted to. Instead, I sat in the back seat and let the city lights blur past the window, my mind already turning over numbers and names, and the conversation I'd had 3 weeks earlier with a venture capital firm in New York. They'd asked if I was serious about re-entering the corporate world. I'd told them I was considering it. Now I was certain. James had built his company, Harrington Solutions, from the ground up. It was a mid-sized consulting firm specializing in digital transformation for legacy businesses. He was proud of it, proud of his corner office and his executive title, and the fact that he'd done it all without our parents' money. What he didn't know was that Harrington Solutions had been quietly hemorrhaging clients for the past 18 months. What he also didn't know is that I'd spent the last decade building a consulting portfolio under a business alias, working with firms twice his size, earning a reputation in circles he never thought to enter. The venture capital firm, Apex Partners, had approached me 6 months ago. They were interested in acquiring mid-tier consulting firms and scaling them aggressively. They wanted someone with operational experience and a proven track record to lead the integration. I'd been on their radar because of a white paper I published on digital ecosystems. We'd had coffee in Manhattan. They'd made an offer. I'd told them I needed time to think. That night, in my hotel room, I drafted an email. I told Apex I was ready to move forward. I told them I had a target acquisition in mind. I attached my due diligence report on Harrington Solutions, a document I'd been updating for months, tracking every contract renewal, every employee departure, every quarterly slip. I hit send at 2 a.m. and finally called David. "How was the wedding?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Illuminating," I said. "I'll tell you when I get home." Apex Partners moved faster than I expected. Within 72 hours, they'd reviewed my proposal and greenlit preliminary negotiations. By the end of the week, they'd approached James's board with a buyout offer framed as a growth opportunity. James, to his credit, was initially suspicious. He called me 4 days after the wedding, his voice tight with confusion. "Did you know about this?" he asked. No greeting, no preamble. Apex Partners wants to buy the company. They're offering serious money, Claire. Did they contact you? I was in my kitchen, unloading the dishwasher while Lily colored at the table. I wedged the phone between my shoulder and ear. Why would they contact me? Because they mentioned your name. They said they'd done research and that you'd be a valuable asset in the transition. What does that even mean? I set a plate in the cabinet. It means they did their homework, James. My consulting work isn't exactly a secret. Your consulting work, he repeated, the words dripping with skepticism. You mean the freelance stuff you do between school pickups? Something like that. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing, trying to fit the pieces together. They're offering $10 million, he said finally. The board wants me to take it. They think it's a smart move. Then maybe you should take it. You really think so? I think you should do what's best for the company, I said, which wasn't a lie. What was best for the company was new leadership, and I intended to provide it. James accepted the offer 2 weeks later. The board voted unanimously. Apex Partners announced the acquisition in a press release that highlighted their commitment to innovation and strategic growth. James was named as a transitional advisor, a title that sounded important but carried no real authority. He didn't read the fine print. He didn't ask who would be running operations post-acquisition. He assumed, as he always did, that he'd remain in control. The announcement party was held at a private club in downtown Boston. James wore a new suit and glad-handed investors like he was campaigning for office. Eleanor stood beside him, gracious and glowing, unaware of the tectonic shift happening beneath her feet. I arrived late, intentionally, and wore the same navy dress I'd worn to the wedding. I'd had it dry cleaned, and it looked as crisp as it had that night. James saw me across the room and waved. I waved back. An Apex executive named Richard Moss found me near the bar. He was in his 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who thrived on calculated risks. "You ready for Monday?" he asked, handing me a glass of sparkling water. "Absolutely," I said. "Your brother doesn't know yet." "I'm aware." Richard studied me for a moment. He said, "This is going to get ugly." It already was, I said. I'm just making it official. He smiled, not unkindly. I like you, Claire. You don't flinch. I didn't flinch because I'd been preparing for this moment for months. I'd rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times. I'd run the numbers, consulted with legal, and mapped out the restructuring plan. I knew exactly what needed to happen, and I knew James wouldn't make it easy. But I also knew he'd left me no choice. You don't humiliate someone in front of 400 people and expect them to stay silent forever. Monday morning, I arrived at Harrington Solutions at 7:30. The building was a sleek glass tower near the harbor, the kind of place that looked impressive in marketing materials. I'd been here before, years ago, back when James was still trying to convince me to join his team. I'd declined then, citing family obligations. He called me short-sighted. Now, I stood in the lobby with a security badge and an executive access card, waiting for the elevator. Richard met me on the 10th floor. The executive suite was quiet, the assistants not yet at their desks. He walked me to the corner office, James's office, and handed me a key. He said, "It's yours now. The board meeting starts at 9. James will be there." "I know." "You want me in the room?" "No, this is between me and him." Richard nodded and left. I stepped into the office and set my briefcase on the desk. The space was exactly as I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, modern furniture, framed awards on the walls. James' degrees hung behind the desk, his name embossed in gold. I didn't touch them. I'd deal with the optics later. At 9, I walked into the boardroom. 12 chairs surrounded a long table. 8 of them filled with board members I'd met during the acquisition process. James sat at the head of the table, smiling, relaxed. He thought this was a courtesy meeting, a chance to welcome the new investors and reaffirm his role. He looked up when I entered, and his smile faltered. "Claire, what are you doing here?" I pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Claire Harrington, the new CEO of Harrington Solutions. As of today, I'll be overseeing all operations, strategy, and personnel decisions. My first order of business is to restructure the executive team." I opened my briefcase and removed a folder, sliding it down the table toward James. "James, you're terminated effective immediately. Your severance package is outlined in the document. You have until noon to clear your office." The room went silent. James stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then anger. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. This is my company. It was your company. Now it's mine." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You planned this. You've been planning this the whole time." "Yes." His jaw tightened. "Because of the wedding? Because of a joke?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Because you've been bleeding clients and mismanaging resources for 2 years, because the board knows it and you've been too arrogant to see it, and yes, James, because you humiliated me in front of 400 people and thought it was funny." One of the board members, an older woman named Patricia, cleared her throat. "James, the numbers don't lie. We've reviewed Claire's operational plan, and it's sound. This is the right move for the company." James looked around the table, searching for support. No one met his eyes. He turned back to me, his face red. "You're a vindictive, petty—" "Careful," I said quietly. "Security is right outside." He grabbed the folder, his hands shaking, and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind him. I took a breath, feeling the weight of 1,000 unsaid words settle into the silence. Patricia leaned forward. "That took guts." "It took preparation," I said. "Let's get to work." James didn't go quietly. By noon, he'd sent a company-wide email accusing me of staging a corporate coup. By evening, he'd posted a rant on LinkedIn, framing himself as the victim of a hostile takeover orchestrated by his own sister. The comment section filled quickly. Some people defended him, others questioned his version of events, and a few pointed out that his company had been struggling for months. I didn't respond. I let the noise run its course. David read the post that night while we ate dinner. Lily was upstairs, oblivious, and the house felt unusually quiet. He set his phone down and looked at me. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Firing James had felt necessary, even satisfying in the moment, but now the reality of it sat heavy in my chest. He was still my brother. We'd lost our parents together. We'd survived foster care and uncertainty,
and the strange, fragile bond that comes from being each other's only constant. "You did the right thing," David said. "I know. He'll come around eventually." I wasn't sure about that either. James had always been stubborn, and wounded pride was a hard thing to shake. But I also knew that letting him continue to run the company into the ground wouldn't have helped anyone. The employees deserved better, the clients deserved better, and maybe in some small way, I deserved better too. The first week as CEO was a blur of meetings and introductions. I met with department heads, reviewed contracts, and started identifying inefficiencies. The staff was wary at first. James had been popular in his way, and my sudden arrival felt jarring. But I came prepared. I knew the projects, the clients, the pain points. I asked questions and listened to answers. I didn't pretend to have all the solutions, but I made it clear I was committed to finding them. By the end of the second week, things started to shift. A junior analyst named Priya approached me after a strategy meeting. She was in her late 20s, sharp and ambitious, the kind of person James had overlooked because she didn't play office politics. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for giving us a chance to actually do our jobs well." "You are always doing your jobs well," I said. "You just needed someone to notice." She smiled, relieved, and I realized how many people in this building had been waiting for exactly that. Someone who saw their work, their effort, their potential. James had been so focused on his own image that he'd forgotten the company was built by people like Priya, people who showed up every day and tried to make something good. Eleanor called me on a Thursday afternoon. Her voice was careful, measured. "Claire, can we talk?" "Of course." "Not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere?" We agreed on a coffee shop near her condo, a quiet place with big windows and wooden tables. I arrived first and ordered a latte. Eleanor came in 10 minutes later, wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked tired. "I'm not here to defend him," she said as soon as she sat down. "I know what he said at the wedding. I know how he treated you." "Okay." "But he's struggling, Claire. He's angry and embarrassed, and he doesn't know how to process it. He feels like you betrayed him." "He betrayed me first." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I know. And I think, deep down, he knows it too, but he's not ready to admit it yet." I stirred my latte, watching the foam swirl. "I didn't do this to hurt him, Eleanor. I did it because the company was failing, and he wasn't going to fix it." "I believe you, but he sees it differently. He sees his little sister, who he's always thought of as someone he needed to take care of, stepping in and taking over. It's messing with his head." "That's not my problem," I said, though the words felt harsher than I intended. Eleanor reached across the table and touched my hand. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm just asking you to be patient. He'll come around. It might take time, but he will." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that James and I could find our way back to something resembling a relationship. But I also knew that some things, once broken, didn't mend cleanly. We'd always carry the fractures. At work, the restructuring progressed steadily. I hired 2 new senior consultants and promoted Priya to lead a key project. We secured 3 new contracts in the first month, and client retention improved by 15%. The numbers started to stabilize. Apex partners sent congratulatory emails. Richard Moss called to say the board was impressed. James, meanwhile, disappeared from public view. His LinkedIn went quiet. Mutual acquaintances reported seeing him around town, but no one knew what he was doing. Part of me wanted to reach out, to check on him, to bridge the gap. But another part, the part that remembered standing in that ballroom, swallowing humiliation, held me back. Lily asked about Uncle James one evening while I helped her with homework. "Is he still mad at you?" "I think so, sweetheart." "Why?" "Because sometimes grown-ups had a hard time saying sorry." She frowned, considering this. "That's silly." "Yeah," I said. "It really is." David found me later that night, staring at my laptop in the dim glow of the kitchen. He sat down across from me, his expression gentle. "You can't fix him, Claire. You can only fix what's in front of you." "I know." "Do you?" I closed the laptop and looked at him. I keep thinking about when we were kids. James used to walk me to school every morning after our parents died. He'd make me breakfast, usually burnt toast, and he'd check my backpack to make sure I had everything. He wasn't good at it, but he tried. He's not that kid anymore. No. But I keep hoping some part of him still is. David reached out across the table and touched my hand. Maybe that part is still there, but you can't wait for it to show up. You've got a company to run and a life to live. Let him figure out his own way back. I squeezed his hand, grateful for the steadiness he always brought. When did you get so wise? I married you, he said. I had to level up.
3 months into my tenure as CEO, Harrington Solutions won a contract with a Fortune 500 client, a deal worth $8 million over 2 years. It was the kind of win that validated every decision I'd made, every late night, and every difficult conversation. The team celebrated with champagne in the conference room, and for the first time since taking over, I felt like we'd turned a real corner. The press picked up the story. A business journalist wrote a profile on me titled "The Housewife Who Became a CEO." I hated the framing, but the article was fair. It detailed my consulting background, my acquisition strategy, and the turnaround at Harrington Solutions. It mentioned James only briefly, noting that he'd been transitioned out during restructuring. The comment section was predictably divided, but the overall tone was positive. James called me the day the article published. I was in my office reviewing a client proposal when my phone buzzed with his name. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hello?" "I read the article," he said. His voice was flat, drained of the usual bravado. "Okay. You're doing well." "The company's doing well," I corrected. "It's not about me." He was quiet for a beat. "That's not true, though, is it? It is about you. You built this. I just didn't see it." I leaned back in my chair, trying to read the tone behind his words. "Why are you calling, James?" "Because I owe you an apology." I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. "What?" "I owe you an apology," he repeated, slower this time. "For the wedding, for everything before that, for treating you like you didn't matter." My throat tightened. "Okay. I was an ass, Claire. I thought because you stayed home with Lily, because you weren't in an office, that you weren't, I don't know, serious, important. I was wrong." "Yes, you were. And I'm sorry. I should have said it months ago, but I was too angry, too embarrassed. I blamed you for everything, instead of looking at what I'd done." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 3 months of silence and resentment begin to shift. "I didn't want to fire you, James. I wanted to save the company, but I couldn't do that with you in charge. You weren't listening. You weren't changing." "I know, and you were right. The company was failing, and I was too proud to admit it." "Where are you now?" "I'm consulting independently. Small projects, nothing fancy. It's humbling, but it's honest work." He paused. "Eleanor's been good about it. Better than I deserve." "She loves you." "Yeah, I'm trying to deserve that too." We talked for another 20 minutes, the conversation winding through apologies and explanations and tentative steps towards something resembling reconciliation. He didn't ask for his job back. He didn't ask for forgiveness, not exactly, but he acknowledged the hurt he caused, and that felt like a beginning. Before we hung up, he said, "I saw Lily's photo on your desk in that article. She's gotten so big." "She has." "I'd like to see her sometime, if that's okay." "We'll figure it out," I said, and I meant it. The next few months brought steady growth. Harrington Solutions expanded into 2 new markets, hired 15 additional employees, and landed on a top companies to watch list in a major business magazine. I was invited to speak at a conference on corporate transformation, and I accepted, despite the nerves that came with public speaking. David and Lily sat in the front row, and when I finished, they stood and clapped louder than anyone else in the room. James showed up at the office one late spring. He didn't call ahead, just appeared in the lobby and asked the receptionist if I had a few minutes. She buzzed me, uncertain, and I told her to send him up. He stood in my doorway, hands in his pockets, looking around the office that used to be his. "It looks different," he said. "I moved some things around." "It's good. Better than how I had it." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit." He sat, and for a moment we just looked at each other. The anger that had defined the past year felt distant now, replaced with something quieter, more complicated. "I came to say I'm proud of you," he said. "I should have said it a long time ago, but I'm saying it now. You're doing an incredible job." Thank you. I also wanted to ask if you'd be open to working together again. Not here, not as an employee, but I've got a project that could use your expertise. And I thought, James, I interrupted gently, I'm happy to help you, but not because I owe you, and not because you're my brother. Because you're asking, and because it's a good project. That's the only reason. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Fair enough. We spent the next hour talking through his project, a digital transformation initiative for a regional nonprofit. It was smaller than what I usually handled, but it was meaningful work, and I agreed to consult. As he left, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm glad you fired me. I needed it. I'm glad you can see that now. Yeah, me too. After he was gone, I sat at my desk and looked out at the harbor. The water was calm, reflecting the afternoon sun and shards of gold and silver. I thought about the wedding, the toast, the humiliation. I thought about the months of anger and preparation and the moment I'd walked into that boardroom in my navy dress. I thought about how far we'd come. James and I, the company, my own sense of what I was capable of. David called me as I was packing up for the day. How'd it go? Good. Really good. I'm proud of you, Claire. I know. I'm proud of me, too. That night, I picked Lily up from school and took her for ice cream. We sat on a bench outside the shop, watching people walk by, the air warm and full of early summer promise. She asked if Uncle James was coming to her birthday party. I told her yes, he was. She grinned, chocolate ice cream smudged on her chin, and said, Good, I missed him. Me too, sweetheart, I said. Me too. The company continued to grow. We hit revenue targets ahead of schedule, expanded into international markets, and earned industry recognition for innovation. I was interviewed on podcasts, profiled in magazines, and invited to join advisory boards. But the work I was proudest of wasn't the accolades or the metrics. It was the culture we'd built, a place where people like Priya could thrive, where effort was recognized, where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than grounds for punishment. James and I didn't become best friends overnight. We didn't erase the past or pretend the hurt hadn't happened, but we found a new rhythm, one built on mutual respect and honest communication. He came to Lily's birthday party and brought her a telescope because she'd mentioned once that she wanted to see the stars up close. He stayed for cake and laughed at David's terrible jokes and told me quietly before he left, Thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't give up on you. I just stopped letting you define me. He nodded, understanding settling into his expression. That's probably the same thing. On the 1-year anniversary of taking over as CEO, I hosted a company-wide celebration. We rented out a rooftop venue, strung lights across the terrace, and invited everyone, from senior executives to the newest hires. I gave a short speech, thanking the team for their hard work and dedication, and I raised a glass to the future. As I looked out at the faces around me, I realized that this community, this shared purpose, was what I'd been building all along. James sent me a text that evening. Congratulations. You've earned every bit of it. I replied, Thank you. Couldn't have done it without people who believed in me. He sent back a single word. Touché. David found me on the terrace later, after most of the guests had left. The city stretched out below us, lights glittering like scattered stars. David wrapped an arm around my shoulders. You did it. We did it, I corrected. How does it feel? I thought about the question, really thought about it. It feels like I finally stopped waiting for permission to be who I already was. He kissed my top of the head. That's a good feeling. Yeah, it really is.